On the 60th floor of a glass tower in New York City, a man's whole world was about to be ripped apart. Noah Reed stood in front of a massive desk, his hands folded, his server's uniform looking painfully out of place against the marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind the desk sat Elise Harrington, billionaire, CEO, untouchable. She didn't smile. She didn't soften her voice. "Mr. Reed," she said calmly, "you're fired." Silence. The city hummed below them, a river of tiny headlights and rushing lives. Up here, it felt like another planet. Noah didn't argue. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He just looked at her, and what he said next would break through walls Elise had spent a lifetime building. But to understand why those simple words shattered her, you have to know who Noah Reed really was. Noah woke up every morning at 5:30 a.m., not to an alarm clock, not to music, but to the soft, steady sound of his daughter breathing in the next room. Their apartment was small, a worn-out one-bedroom in Queens with thin walls, peeling paint, and a radiator that clanged like an old engine during winter nights. The bedroom belonged to Annie. Noah slept on the couch. By 6 a.m., he was in the tiny kitchen, moving quietly so he wouldn't wake her too soon. Scrambled eggs. Toast. A glass of orange juice carefully set on the chipped table. A few minutes later, a little girl with curly dark hair and sleepy hazel eyes patted in, rubbing her face with small fists, her pajamas wrinkled, her hair wild. This was Annie, 6 years old. His whole universe. She climbed into the chair, grabbed a crayon and a coloring book, and started drawing while Noah packed her lunch. He watched her in the dim morning light, and sometimes, just for a second, he saw her mother's eyes. 2 years earlier, his wife had texted him from the car. "On my way home. Do we need milk?" He never got to answer. A crash on the FDR. Police at his door. A funeral he barely remembers. For 3 months after that, Noah fell apart. He missed work, ignored bills, let dishes, laundry, and life pile up around him. Then one night, as he sat on the couch in the dark, Annie crawled into his lap, her small hands holding his face. "Daddy, you're not going to leave me too, right?" That single question dragged him back from the edge. He wrapped his arms around her and made a promise he never intended to break. "I'm not going anywhere, baby. I'm here. Always." From that moment, every decision he made was for her. Now he worked for Harrington Hotels and Dining, in a high-end restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. He wasn't a manager. He didn't wear a suit. He was a server. Sometimes a bartender. The kind of person people barely noticed unless something went wrong. The money wasn't great, but it kept the lights on, paid the rent, and just barely covered Annie's school tuition. On good days, when tips were decent, he bought her a little treat, a book, a toy, and ice cream after school. On bad days, he pretended everything was fine and skipped dinner so she didn't have to. He never complained. Complaining didn't pay bills. Their morning routine was clockwork. By 7:15, they were on the subway, Annie's small hand tucked into his as the train rattled below the city. She talked nonstop about school, her friends, her upcoming school play. "I'm going to be a tree," she said proudly one morning. "A tree, huh?" Noah smiled. The most important part of the forest. Her giggle was worth more than any payday. At 8 a.m., he dropped her at school, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Be brave." Then he turned around and headed back into Manhattan, trading the role of dad for server. By 9 a.m., he was in the staff locker room at Harrington Dining, tying his black apron, straightening his white shirt, and heading out to polish silverware, restock the bar, fold napkins. The restaurant didn't open until 11, but there was always work to do. Most of his coworkers barely noticed him. A few were friendly. Most saw him as temporary, replaceable. They didn't know that everything he did was survival. Not for himself. For Annie. 60 floors above his world, Elise Harrington watched people like Noah the way other people watch traffic from a distance. From the windows of her corner office, the streets looked like veins of light. Cars were toys. People were ants. And distance made decisions easier. Elise was 32. For the last 5 years, She'd been the CEO of Harrington Hotels and Dining, a luxury empire her father, Richard Harrington, had built from a single Boston hotel into a glittering chain along the East Coast. When he retired, he didn't hand her the company as a gift. He handed it to her as a challenge. "Prove you're strong enough to keep it," he'd said. Her father believed in tests. Always had. When she was 16, he'd canceled her credit cards without warning and told her, "You have 30 days. No help. No safety net. Survive." She got 3 part-time jobs. Slept in a cheap hostel. Lived on instant noodles and pride. At the end of the month, he took her to dinner, nodded once, and said, "You passed." That was the closest he'd ever come to saying, "I'm proud of you." Elise learned 2 things from that month. She could survive alone. Love and comfort were luxuries the weak depended on. So she built walls. Around her heart. Around her emotions. Around her entire life. Sentiment was weakness. Trust was a liability. The only way to know someone's character was to take away what they needed most and see what was left. That year, as CEO, Elise decided she didn't trust HR's polite performance reviews. She wanted something raw, unfiltered, brutally honest. So, she designed her own test. Over 2 weeks, she called in 12 employees from different departments, a line cook, a housekeeper, a front desk manager, a bartender. Each one entered her office thinking it was a normal review. Each one sat in front of her desk. Each one heard the same sentence. "You're fired." It wasn't real. Their jobs were safe technically, but she watched closely. Who begged? Who blamed? Who exploded? Who simply collapsed? When she'd seen enough, she'd reveal the truth. This was a test. Your actual evaluation will be conducted later. Her assistant said it was cruel. Elise called it honest. People showed their real selves when they thought they'd lost everything. So far, the reactions had been predictable. A lot of desperate pleading. Some anger. A few tears. Nobody surprised her. Until Noah Reed walked into her office. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The restaurant's lunch rush was over, and the dinner crowd hadn't arrived yet. Noah had been told to report to the 60th floor at 2 p.m. He knocked on the office door, his stomach tight, his hands a little damp. "Come in," a cool voice called. He stepped inside. The room looked like another world. Polished wood, glass, soft lighting. The city stretched out behind Elise like a backdrop in a movie. She looked younger than he'd expected. Blonde hair pulled back, tailored black suit, eyes that missed nothing. She gestured to the chair. He sat. She didn't waste a second. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice smooth, professional. "You're fired." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. For a heartbeat, the room went silent. No air. No sound. Just those 2 words echoing in his head. You're fired. Rent. Groceries. Annie's school. Her little tree costume for the play. All of it flashed through his mind in one dizzy second. He swallowed. She expected panic. Anger. Begging. Instead, Noah took a slow breath, steadied his shaking hands under the desk, and looked her in the eye. "Thank you for the opportunity to work here, Miss Harrington," he said quietly. Elise blinked. That wasn't in the usual script. But Noah wasn't finished. He dropped his gaze to his hands, then looked back up. "If I really am losing my job today," he said, his voice softer now, edged with something like grief, I only have one request." Elise leaned back, curious despite herself. "And what is that?" "Please," he paused, forcing the words out. "Please don't tell my daughter. She thinks I'm doing my best. I don't want her to think I gave up on her." Something lodged in Elise's throat. For a moment, the 60th floor, the glass tower, the whole city went blurry around that one sentence. He wasn't asking for his job. He wasn't asking for mercy. He was asking her to protect his daughter's belief in him. It hit a place inside her she didn't know still existed. She stared at him, at this man in a cheap white shirt and worn black shoes, and for the first time in a long time, her script fell apart. "It was a test, Mr. Reed," she said abruptly. "You're not actually fired." Noah blinked, confusion flooding his face. A test. I wanted to see how employees react under pressure, she explained. Most beg. Some rage. You thought about your daughter.
His jaw tightened. He stood.
That's cruel, he said quietly. Elise raised an eyebrow. It's effective. He nodded once and turned toward the door. I hope you found what you were looking for, Miss Harrington. He walked out without waiting to be dismissed. The door clicked shut. Elise sat alone in a room suddenly too quiet, watching the space he'd just occupied. She'd expected gratitude when she told him it was a test. Instead, he looked at her like she was something cold, something broken. And that look followed her long after he left. That night, instead of going home, Elise stayed in her office. She pulled Noah's employee file from the system.
2 years with the company.
Never late. Never missed a shift, except when his daughter was sick. Always requested early schedules, so he could pick her up from school. Minimum wage plus tips. No complaints. No disciplinary actions.
Steady.
Invisible. Reliable. Then a note in the file caught her eye. His wife had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. Elise stared at the screen. She thought about her own father, his tests, his iron grip on her life. Strength is surviving without help, he'd always said. Looking at Noah's file, she found herself wondering if her father had been wrong. Maybe the strongest thing a person could do was not survive for themselves, but survive for someone else. She closed his file, but the thought didn't close with it. Over the next weeks, Elise did something she'd never done before. She watched a single employee, not openly, not in person, from cameras, from reports, from a safe distance. On security footage, she saw Noah arrive 15 minutes early for every shift. She saw him help a new server fix a ruined order, cover for a coworker who was hungover, stay late to wipe tables that weren't his responsibility. He treated dishwashers, chefs, managers, everyone with the same quiet respect. And every day, without fail, he left 30 minutes early to pick up his daughter. A manager had written him up for that once. Elise found the report, deleted it, and sent a memo to all departments. Employees with children are allowed flexible schedules. No exceptions. She didn't sign her name at the bottom. She didn't have to. One night, watching the audio feed from the break room, she heard Noah talking with a line cook named Marcus. Marcus joked about dating, about remarrying. Noah's voice came through the speaker, tired but firm. People ask why I don't remarry, he said. I tell them I haven't met anyone who deserves to be called Annie's mom. And I'm not ready to let anyone replace my wife. There was a clatter of dishes. Silence. Then Marcus said softly, Respect, man. Elise sat in her leather chair, heat rising in her chest, something close to jealousy. Not because he loved his late wife. Because he'd loved her that completely. She wondered what it would feel like to be loved like that. Wholly. Without condition. No test. No conditions. No performance review. Just loved. 2 weeks later, chaos arrived in the form of a phone call. Noah's neighbor, the one who watched Annie during his evening shifts, had fallen and broken her wrist. She couldn't help anymore. Noah had no family nearby. No backup plan. No childcare. He called the restaurant, voice tight with stress. Elise happened to be in the small office with the shift manager, Diane, when the call came in. The phone was on speaker. Diane, I'm so sorry, Noah said. I have nobody to watch Annie tonight. Just for tonight, could I bring her to the restaurant? I'll keep her in the back. She won't bother anyone. I'll find another solution tomorrow. I promise. Diane glanced at Elise. Elise hesitated. Then she nodded once. Diane relayed the answer. Okay, Noah. Just for tonight. Bring her. When the call ended, Diane sighed. Single dad life, huh? That's rough. Elise said nothing. But she didn't go home that night. At 8 p.m., she went down to the restaurant instead. The dinner rush vibrated with energy. Servers weaving through tables. Glasses clinking. Kitchen shouting. And in a quiet corner near the dishwashing station, sitting on a plastic crate with a coloring book in her lap, was Annie. Curly dark hair in a ponytail. Pink sweatshirt. jeans with grass stains. She swung her feet, completely absorbed in her drawing. Noah stepped into frame carrying a plate of chicken tenders and fries. He crouched down, spoke softly, smiled at her. Annie grinned and took a fry. He kissed the top of her head before hurrying back to the bar. Elise watched from the doorway, unseen, for a long moment. Something twisted in her chest. She left before either of them saw her. An hour later, a knock at her office door tore her from her paperwork. Her assistant stood there, anxious. There's a situation downstairs, the little girl. She's sick. Elise didn't remember getting from her chair to the elevator. When she burst into the kitchen, she saw Noah holding Annie in his arms. Her face was flushed, her hair damp with sweat. She whimpered, clutching his shirt. "It's okay," he murmured. "I've got you. Daddy's here." His hands, though, were trembling. "What happened?" Elise demanded. Noah looked up, panic barely contained in his eyes. "She has a fever. She's burning up. I called for a cab, but no one's coming. I don't have a car." "Come with me," Elise said. "My car is downstairs." He hesitated for only a second, then followed. In the back seat of her sleek black Tesla, Noah cradled Annie, whispering to her as Elise drove through the city like a race she needed to win. The hospital was 15 minutes away. It felt like 50. Every time Elise glanced in the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of Noah's hand stroking Annie's hair. The kind of gentle, constant touch she'd never known growing up. At the hospital, doctors took Annie quickly. Viral infection. High fever. Scary but treatable. They'd keep her overnight for observation. Noah stayed at her bedside, fingers wrapped around her small hand. Elise stood at the window, staring out at the city lights, feeling strangely out of place in a world of beeping machines and children's drawings taped to the walls. After a long silence, Noah spoke. "Thank you, Miss Harrington," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there." "You'd have figured something out," she said quietly, still staring at the city. "You always do." He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Why did you really do that test?" She turned. He was watching her, not as an employee, not as a subordinate, as a person asking for the truth. She could lie. She could say it was company policy. She could hide behind numbers and strategy. But for some reason, she didn't. "When I was 16, my father cut me off," she said. "No money. No help. He called it a test of strength. I worked 3 jobs. I slept in a hostel. At the end, he said I'd passed. He taught me that needing people makes you weak." "Did it make you stronger?" Noah asked gently. She looked down at Annie, sleeping peacefully, her chest rising and falling. "I know how to survive," Elise said. "I just don't know if I know how to live." Noah's gaze softened. "My wife used to say the opposite," he murmured. "She believes strength isn't about surviving alone. It's about surviving for someone else." Elise felt something shift inside her. A hairline crack in the walls she'd built around her heart. "I didn't have anyone to survive for," she said. Noah looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe you do now," he said quietly. The words lingered long after the night ended. By dawn, Annie was cleared to go home. Elise drove them back to Queens, watching in the mirror as Noah carried Annie into the worn apartment building. He thanked her again, genuinely softly. She drove back to her immaculate penthouse later, walked into the silent, spotless space, and for the first time, it felt less like success and more like a museum of a life no one lived in. For the first time in years, Elise Harrington felt lonely. 3 days later, her private moment turned public. A grainy photo appeared on a gossip site. It showed Elise carrying a small child into a hospital, a man behind her, Noah, his face partially visible. The headline screamed, "Billionaire CEO's secret child? Mystery man and midnight hospital visits spark rumors." By noon, every major outlet was running it. By evening, it was trending. Speculation exploded. Was the child hers? Was Noah the secret father? What was the billionaire hiding? Elise issued a statement. "I assisted an employee's family during a medical emergency. There is no secret child." No one cared. The truth was boring. Drama sold better. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Elise sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by polished suits and cold eyes. This scandal is affecting our stock price, the CFO, Gerald, said sharply. We need to contain it. Patricia, another board member, opened a folder. We've identified the man in the photo, Noah Reed. A server. Low-level employee. Gerald didn't flinch. Then the solution is simple.
Terminate him.
Issue a statement that he's no longer with the company. Create distance. Elise's voice dropped a few degrees.
No.
Gerald frowned. Elise, this is not personal. I said no. If you don't handle this, Patricia said coolly, the board will.
Elise stood.
This meeting is over. She walked out before they could respond. That night, she sat alone in her office, staring at her phone. She wrote and deleted a dozen messages to Noah.
I'm sorry.
This isn't your fault. I should have protected you. Nothing felt like enough. The next morning, the board sent her an ultimatum. Fire Noah Reed.
Or step down as CEO.
Elise stared at the email, the words blurring. For the first time, her father's voice didn't feel like a guiding force. It felt like a chain. She called Noah to her office. He arrived looking tired, like he hadn't slept in days. He sat across from her, his eyes dull but steady. Elise forced herself to speak. The board is pressuring me. The media, the photo. Just say it, he said quietly. She swallowed. I need you to take a leave of absence. Temporarily. Until this blows over. He stared at her. So you're letting them win, he said. It's not like that, I'm trying to. Yes, he said, still calm, still controlled. It is. He stood. You tested me to see who I was, he said. Now I know who you are. The words sank deeper than any insult. She wanted to argue. To tell him she was protecting him. That she was trapped. That she was trying. But the truth was she hadn't chosen him. She'd chosen fear. He walked to the door, then paused. You know what's worse than losing my job? He asked, looking back at her. It's realizing I actually started to believe you cared. The door clicked shut. And this time, Elise couldn't tell herself it was just a test. She'd lost him. For real. For 3 days, she didn't go home. She slept on the couch in her office. Worked when she could. Mostly stared at the ceiling. I thought you were different. I was wrong. His words replayed over and over. On the 4th day, she opened Noah's file again. 2 years of quiet loyalty. 2 years of extra shifts, early mornings, flexible requests for Annie. 2 years of doing the work of 3 people for minimum wage. Her father had always told her strength meant sacrificing others before they sacrificed you. Sitting alone on the 60th floor, with no one she could call, no one she trusted, she finally understood. He hadn't taught her strength. He taught her to be alone. Noah, on the other hand, had almost nothing. And yet, he had someone worth surviving for.
Annie.
Elise looked at the board's ultimatum again. Fire Noah, or step down. For the first time in her life, the choice felt clear. The next evening, Elise drove back to Queens. Rain streaked across her windshield as she parked across from Noah's building. She wasn't wearing her armor, no flawless hair, no perfect makeup. Just a coat thrown over her clothes and fear twisting in her chest. The hallway smelled like old carpet and cooking oil. She found apartment 3C and knocked. The door opened. Noah stood there in a gray t-shirt and jeans, hair still damp from a shower. When he saw her, his shoulders stiffened. What are you doing here? He asked. Elise swallowed. I need to talk to you. He considered slamming the door. Instead, he stepped aside. She walked into a small, cluttered living room. A sagging couch. A low table covered in crayons and coloring books. A drawing taped proudly to the fridge. The opposite of her empty penthouse. He stayed standing, arms folded. Say what you came to say. Her hands were shaking. I'm sorry, she said. He didn't respond. I was wrong, she continued. About the test. About the leave of absence. About all of it. I told myself I was protecting the company. I told myself I was being strong. But all I did was hurt you. Noah's jaw flexed. You didn't just hurt me, he said quietly. You made me feel disposable. Like I only mattered as long as I stayed in my place. The words hit her like a slap. You're not disposable, she said quickly. You matter more than you know. More than. She cut herself off. She took a breath. For most of my life, I've believed that caring makes you weak, she said. My father tested me until I stopped trusting anyone. But when I saw you with Annie, I realized I've been living inside a prison I built myself. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. This is for you, she said, placing it on the table. Inside was a new contract. No gimmicks. No tricks, she said. You're not just getting your job back. You're being promoted to director of restaurant operations. It's 5 times your current salary. You'll have control over staffing, scheduling, and policy. You'll be able to change the way people at that restaurant are treated. He opened the envelope, scanned the pages, saw the number, and looked back at her. Why now? He asked softly. Why not 3 days ago, when I needed you to stand up for me? Tears stung her eyes. Because I was afraid, she said. Afraid of the board. Afraid of losing the company. Afraid that if I admitted how much you and Annie mean to me, I'd lose everything that made me me. She shook her head. But then I lost you anyway. And that hurt more than anything they could take. He sat slowly on the edge of the couch, the contract in his hands. I don't know if I can trust you, he admitted. I know, she said honestly. I'm not asking you to. Not yet. I'm just asking you to let me try to be someone you can trust. For a moment, the only sound was rain against the windows. Then a bedroom door creaked open. Daddy. A small voice called. Annie stood in the hallway, in pajamas with little animals printed on them, rubbing her eyes. Her gaze landed on Elise, and her face lit up. Miss Elise, she gasped. Before anyone could speak, she ran over and hugged Elise's legs tightly. Elise froze, shocked by the small arms wrapped around her. Noah watched silent. Slowly, awkwardly, Elise knelt and hugged Annie back. I missed you, Annie said, beaming up at her. Daddy said you were busy with work, but I knew you'd come. Elise's eyes filled with tears. I'm happy to see you too, she whispered. Annie turned to Noah. Is Daddy still going to work at your restaurant? She asked. Noah glanced at Elise. Something in his expression had softened. Not forgiveness, not yet. But something close. Yeah, kiddo, he said gently. I think he is. Annie clapped her hands and looked back at Elise. Good, she said. Because I like you. You're really nice. Nice. A word Elise had never once used to describe herself. But in that small apartment, with a child's arms around her and a man watching her with cautious hope for the first time, it didn't sound impossible. 2 months later, Elise stood behind a podium facing a room full of reporters. Camera flashes lit up the air. She didn't send a publicist in her place. She didn't hide behind statements. She spoke. She explained the photo, the scandal, the truth. She announced Noah's promotion and made it clear it wasn't charity. It was overdue recognition of the work he'd been doing quietly for years. Then she said something nobody expected. I've spent most of my life believing that vulnerability was weakness, she said. That caring made you easy to hurt. I tested people. I pushed them. I watched them break and told myself that made me strong. She paused, then continued. But I was wrong. The strongest thing I've ever done is admit that I made a mistake. And the bravest person I know is a single father who asked me not to tell his daughter he'd been fired because he didn't want her to think less of him. The room was silent. Elise looked straight into the cameras. Noah Reed taught me what strength really means, she said. And I am proud to have him on my team. Some board members resigned after that. Some shareholders sold their stock. But the people who mattered stayed. And the ones who worked under Noah felt the difference almost immediately. Fair schedules, respect, flexibility, humanity. 3 months later, on a cool spring evening, the rooftop of Harrington Tower didn't look like a corporate fortress anymore. It looked like a garden. Fresh grass. Benches. Flowers gently moving in the breeze. a space she'd had built for employees and their families, but one person more than anyone. Annie ran through the garden, chasing a butterfly, laughing so hard the sound bounced off the nearby skyscrapers. Noah stood beside Elise, hands in his pockets, the city glowing around them. "She loves it up here," he said. "That's why I built it," Elise replied. "You built a rooftop garden for my daughter," he teased. "For everyone's kids," she said, then smiled. "But mostly for her." He shook his head, smiling. "You're something else, you know that?" They'd been seeing each other quietly, coffee before work, dinners on weekends when Annie stayed with her grandmother. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. "Thank you," Elise said softly.
For what? He asked.
"For giving me a second chance," she said. "For showing me what it means to be human, not just successful." He took her hand, his fingers warm around hers. "You were always human, Elise," he said. "You just forgot for a while." Annie ran back, holding a small flower. "This is for you," she said, handing it to Elise. Elise knelt, accepting it like it was a crown. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're the best," Annie said, throwing her arms around her neck. Elise hugged her tightly, eyes closing against a sting of tears, not from pain this time, but from a feeling she'd never had words for. Belonging. She stood, one hand in Noah's, the other wrapped around Annie's. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and pink over the city that had once felt cold and unreachable. Now it felt like home. For the first time in 32 years, Elise Harrington wasn't just surviving. She was living. And she wasn't doing it alone.